How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Good evening. It's good to be here. Richard, I think we're going to survive without the chairs, though. Richard asked when we came in if we thought we needed to get some extra chairs for all the people here tonight. I think we'll be okay. I did tell them I know where they're at, so if we need to get them last minute, we're ready. So right now there's plenty of seats. Anybody wants to come on down? If you're watching on Facebook land and say, hey, this looks like a place to be, we'll come on down. We'll wait on you. I would say we'd have some coffee ready for you, but I didn't see Steve didn't bring it. He got water tonight. So we got water. We could make some coffee if we had to, though. Back off. Yes, okay. Enough for today. Well, it's good to be here. With the announcements. I know one thing that I like it. You got to kind of move it around. But I noticed that, Rick Libby had sent me information on it. He says, Howard Robinson, gentleman from Waldron that passed away, his funeral is tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the Heritage Funeral Home in Waldron. Let's see, the Libby's, Vicky cleaned today, and so I know they'll be there most likely, and I think they're having a reception or a dinner afterwards at the building, Waldron, following the funeral. So I know that's keep prayers for that church. That's tough. They've had two people that been there for decades, as far as established and part of their leadership throughout the years, and so that's tough when a congregation like that loses one, let alone two. Also, Tammy Corbett, her nephew, has been in a motorcycle accident, and they're doing surgery on him. I think brain injuries, I think is what they're really concerned with. And so she had requested prayers tonight. Anything else we need to make mention of? Okay? Okay. Yes. November the 8th. Okay. We'll keep, I assume it's local somewhere in Fort Smith. Remind us, make sure we get it in the bulletin. How's our favorite teacher doing? Good. Landon looked up like, where is she? I don't see her. Oh, yeah. Anyway, you are some people's favorite. But anyway, so it's good. I know it's good to see people out. I know the numbers continue to do good, and so it's good to see more things back to normal. I know magazines having their homecoming, and that gets a little confusing because they're doing it the same week as the football homecoming, so it's homecoming. So anyway, I know Haley is going to participate for the first time ever and be there to see the festivities of the magazine, and so that's a good community thing to see. It's always good when our communities are only as good as the involvement of our people. So these events we have, it's not so much to I'm sure the businesses appreciate extra business on those days. I'm sure it's good to see people, but it's really a way to bring us together. And so sporting events do that, and as well as these things that we do. And so I think it's good to be part of those. Anything else we need to make mention of, or I'm going to have a prayer in just a second. Monica goes back next Monday for Friday for CT scans. She's got a lot of little test type things she's got to do, scans and other things. And then after they're all done, about a week later, she'll get the results. So, yeah. And so basically, keep her in your prayers. Treatment-wise, she's kind of got a little break right now, and then basically she's in the evaluation stage. So our prayers need to be that things go well. That name sounds familiar. Mike Rogers, okay. Is he from this area, or maybe that's where I saw him? Yes. Huh? Little League homecoming. So that is always exciting as well. I'm sure if you want to hear some screaming and cheering, just sit next to Sarah and you'll hear it. Pretty girl, yes. I saw her in the parade. That was really neat. So yeah, that's another exciting thing. Of course, it's hard to believe how quick the season goes on because next Friday is senior night already for the football team. So, and then the volleyball team, they're going to state, but basically it's almost over. The season is. So anyway, just if they could have a conference, a district where they get rid of Hackett and Paris, they do really well. Okay. Let's go ahead and have a prayer, then we'll begin our class. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this evening. We thank you for those that are here that have the desire to learn more about your word. We pray that you be with all of us here, that we may strive to be a people of your word. We ask especially be those on our sick list. We especially ask that you be with Tammy Corbett's nephew as he's in surgery following a severe accident. Be with the doctors, nurses, and may that turn out well. We pray that you be with the church at Waldron as they've lost two of their leaders for a long time. Be with them and help them. Be with Jennifer's friend that passed away and that family. And be with all of us as we continue to endeavor in what may be difficult times. Lord, may we always strive to be that light set on the hill, be the salt of the earth. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Anyway, we are, if you've been following, I hope you have followed. By the way, if you've not been following along the daily Bible readings, it's a good time to start because we have just started the New Testament. So you can back up a few days and you can start the New Testament and close the end of the year out just right. Listening to the Bible reading from here until then. And so as a result, come January, we're going to begin a series, and basically that's kind of really underselling it. We're going to begin an emphasis on the life of Christ using the commentaries from Truth for the World. And so it's going to be kind of a good time. Lots going to be done with that. And so with that, I really didn't think it would be a little overkill to start with some of the same things we'll be covering. And so I thought, what would be good? Because we just ended the Old Testament. We're going to the New Testament. And, sometimes we don't do, I think most of us don't know about what took place. It wasn't like, Malachi's last words, and then within a few years we had the opening at Matthew. That's not the way it worked. In fact, there was about 400 years. A lot of times these are referred to as the silent years. Silent years in the sense that no direct revelation was revealed to man from God during this time. It wasn't silent because a lot of prophecy had talked about this, and we'll get into that. But 400 years, that's a good period of time. You think about 400 years ago, I don't even know, was Jamestown? I don't know. That's how far you go back. I mean, you go back a long time ago. This was all wilderness. I guess maybe Native Americans or others might have been here, but it was, no people per se 400 years ago. And so you can imagine a lot changes in 400 years. And so it's important that we kind of know a little bit. And the reason it's important to know a little bit about the 400 years deals with some of the changes that take place. So why study the time between the Testaments? And by the way, I'm hearing a little bit of a static. Are y'all hearing that too? Or okay. While I check it out. Okay. Now, what's interesting is y'all will hear no difference, but the people on the live stream will. So it's interesting how that works. So you got knobs for the ear, and you got knobs for the TV thing. Anyway, a lot of what information I'm using as a basis, and I'm going to be going in more depth in some things and taking tangents, but I've got a copy, basically, Between the Testaments, Lincoln Old and News by Farrell Jenkins. If you don't know who Farrell Jenkins is, he's a well-regarded scholar. Now, he is, he's been a long-time professor at Florida College. He is as most times they refer to him as a non-institutional churches, but I really think sometimes we do a disservice by even labeling people because, I used to participate in a church camp, and it was in North Carolina, and it was a large church camp. It best facilities I've ever seen for a camp, and the cabins were such that you could hold 24 in each cabin, and they had their own bathrooms inside the cabins, two of them, two groups. So it had enough showers for just pretty much 24 people almost, and it was air conditioned. It wasn't like the little cheesy wall thing. It was like, central air and heat on all these cabins. It was like posh compared to places I've been. But anyway, one of the neat things about it is because in North Carolina, the churches are kind of a little bit more spread out and not a lot of large churches, similar to, say, parts of rural Arkansas. But you would have people that would attend the week I went that were of the, let's just say, a little bit left of center of what I'm used to. And then you'd also have some more conservative. And then you'd actually have, there was one congregation that would always come there that they were, quote, non-institutional. And, I got to know the preacher really well and enjoyed conversations with him. And one of the things he said, and it struck home to me, especially in these days. One time it was more of a contentious thing. But now, really, probably 99% of everything they teach and we teach is exactly the same. So it's really a very small portion of differences. And where the problem gets in is when you start saying, well, you're sinning by doing this or not doing this, you're sinning. And so, but what you're starting to see, and I really look forward today, I think there's going to come a day when there's not going to be that distinction anymore, because in practicality, what most that would consider themselves non-institutional, we pretty much do everything or don't do anything that they would consider wrong. So it's interesting that those things are changing. But anyway, Farrell Jenkins is a well-regarded scholar by anyone, especially he really has traveled to the lands of the New Testament, Old Testament Bible lands, and he's got a lot of good insights. But anyway, as a result, he's really good on some of this. But anyway, so some of this I took from him. From the close of the Old Testament to the opening of the New Testament, 400 years. That's a long time. Many changes took place in the land of Israel. A greater understanding of the New Testament begins with knowledge of the history of Israel and law of Moses. I really don't think you have a full appreciation of books like Romans or the books like Hebrews and even Revelation unless you know a basic fundamental understanding of the Old Testament. But further, we must have a basic understanding of the events of the 400 silent years to appreciate the Jew and his thoughts of the times of Christ. The universal written and spoken Greek language makes a little sense without explanation of the events between the Testaments. Why is the written language Greek? Why is everyone speaking Greek? It really would make no sense. Also, even things like being referred to as Jews. Now, there was some references in, say, the book of Daniel, but it really wasn't as wide scale as what we're going to see once the New Testament times come about. So there's a lot of things. And even in the books, there are things. A lot of times we'll do a cursory explanation when we're teaching or in a sermon of some of these things that come about that really you would have no understanding if you just look at the Old Testament. So if you just study the Old Testament, you would not know that these things were even things. Like synagogues. Try and find the word synagogue or its equivalent. Basically, it just means assembly. But try to find that in the Old Testament. You won't. It won't be found. Now, many believe maybe they were around kind of during this time when they've been taken into captivity, but they really weren't in the same sense in the New Testament till after the written record in the Old Testament. Scribes. You won't read about scribes. You won't know what they're doing with tax collectors. You won't find tax collector because who were the tax collectors working for? Rome. Yeah, they were publicans also sometimes. Pharisees. Did you know there was no such thing as a Pharisee before in the Old Testament? You'll never hear about it. It's interesting. There's a word in the Greek, and you'll see where it say the sect, S-E-C-T, Pharisees or Sadducees. That word is heresy. In the Greek, it is where we get our English word heresy. It's also where you can get the term a heretic from. And so it's interesting that that's what it means, divisions, basically. So different groups or divisions. So scribes, tax collectors, Pharisees, Herodians. There definitely wasn't anything like a Herodian because they had allegiance to Herod, the Herodian family. Idumea. Now, Idumea is not new in one sense. It was referred to as something else in the Old Testament. Anyone know? It was Edom. Now, whose descendants is Edom? The Edomites. Esau. Yes, good answer. Okay. So Esau. So Idumea are the descendants of Esau. Simon the Zealot. What does the word zealot, or I think some translations sometimes will say Canaanite. And you won't know about that from just the Old Testament. Or even the New Testament doesn't explain it. Decapolis. We'll have to see that. Where it is said Talitha cum in the Aramaic translated into Greek. And Mark 5:41. The Herodian family. Traditions of the elders. That really became a big thing during this time between the sessions. Chief priests, scribes, and elders. Mark 11:27. Tribute to Caesar. Once again, a tax reference. Sadducees. Once again, another sect. The whole council, the Sanhedrin. You won't read about that in the Old Testament. In the Gospel of Luke, you got, by the way, there are more of these. These are just kind of a snapshot of some of the things that when you read in the New Testament, you will not find anything about that in the Old Testament. All of a sudden, it's just there. And it's like you should have a reference of it. So part of this study is so we'll have a reference of it when we do study these things. Pontius Pilate was a Roman governor or procurator of Judea. And we'll talk about that. But once again, why in the world is someone that's not a Jew over him? It wouldn't make sense if all he did is in the New Testament. In the Gospel of John, it says the temple was 46 years in building. John 2:20. But the last we read about, because the end of the Old Testament comes, with somewhere between Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi, somewhere in that time frame. What was the status of the temple then? Yeah, so at the time last we read in the Old Testament, it had been rebuilt. The walls had been rebuilt. So why is this saying that it was 46 years in the building? They're still building on it. In the New Testament, some 400 years later. So once again, you would not have any understanding of that without looking into the events that take place during this 400 silent years. Let's see. Samaritan woman said the fathers worshipped in this mountain. In John 4:20. Well, did you know that the Samaritans had actually built a temple on Mount Gerizim? And anyway, you wouldn't know about that and the fact that it was destroyed. And anyway, you would have no clue of that without knowing the things that took place in this 400 years. The dispersion or the diaspora, It's alluded to and mentioned in John 7:35. Basically, it's referring to the Jews as they were dispersed all over the world, basically. Once again, that's not really talked about that much in the Old Testament. Feast of Dedication. That actually starts or happened during these 400 years, silent years. What do we know it probably better as? It occurs on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, which Kislev happens in December. Huh? No. That's in the September-ish time. It's not Christmas, but it's during that time period, similar. Jewish, Hanukkah, there you go. Yeah, Hanukkah is technically the Feast of Dedication. And once again, Jesus attended was part, of the observance of that. But that occurs during this time period. And so we'll actually get into that. We'll actually probably look at the books of Maccabees and get some of the history from that. Crucifixion. Where did crucifixion even come from? And that would actually not be a right answer. So anyway, it seems logical, but once again, we'll see the history of that. It comes through one of the Seleucid kings, or I guess that's what they call themselves. But anyway, one of their emperors during this time period. They're the ones that introduced it. Romans liked it and they perfected it. So it's kind of one of those things, And inscription over cross written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Why were those languages chosen? And really, if you don't really know what took place during these 400 silent years, it really would make not as much sense. In Acts, a Sabbath day journey. Once again, if you look at the Old Testament from Genesis all the way to Malachi, where will you find what a Sabbath day journey is? Okay, where did it come from? It didn't originate in the New Testament, so where did it come from? And what you'd have to find is it originated during this 400 silent years because of everything. So, Sabbath day journey. Hellenistic Jews versus Hebrews, or Grecian Jews, some translations do. What is that about? How did that come about? What is a Hellenistic Jew or a Grecian Jew? And so letters from the high priest, Roman centurions, Paul quoting Greek poets. Why would Paul know what a Greek poet is? A Jewish synagogue in a Roman city in Greece. That just doesn't seem right, does it? That you'd have a Jewish synagogue in a Roman city. And all of that, this one really would perplex you if you didn't have any basic understanding. How could Paul be both a Jew and a Roman citizen at the same time? And why would he even bother to appeal to Caesar? And so these are things that you will find out in this 400 silent years. And in one sense, that's not really a correct way to refer to it because God wasn't silent. He had put into motion these things, but there was no direct revelation. So I think we can understand. The period between the Old Testament and New Testament is often referred to as 400 silent years. This refers to no written, direct oral revelation from God during this era. The books of Ezra, Esther, Nehemiah, and Malachi were written between approximately 458 BC and 400 BC. So by 400 BC, the entirety of the inspired Old Testament was complete. And so from that time till Matthew, the events in Matthew, it was silent. The New Testament begins with the birth of Christ, in essence, somewhere between 6 and 4 BC. Oh, I know, there are some that still would argue for it happened right at the time change. It was meant to be, from the BC to the AD, but there was likely an error made because of Herod. We can tie Herod's death. Most people can say Herod's death was somewhere between this time period, and so as a result, so they were a little off in their calculations. Malachi 4, 5 through 6 closes with the promise of the coming of Elijah the prophet. But yet we know where there was Elijah. New Testament opens with the birth of John the Baptist as a fulfillment. And countless New Testament scriptures point to that. So it's interesting that even though there's a gap, it's like one ends in a way and the other one begins right off where we see those events taking place. Now, one of the things that we'll do a little bit, and I don't want to make this too history class-like, but I do want to hit some highlights of some things. One of the best things you can do in to know the history, an outline of the history between these 400 years, is to know a little bit about the book of Daniel. And in Daniel, Daniel 2, remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He has this, this great image that he sees. He's got this thing that's got a head of gold, arms and chest of silver, belly and thighs of brass, and then the legs and feet of iron, the feet mingled with clay as well. And so, we've studied Daniel, and it's pretty clear, when you tie it to history, you can tell exactly what it's talking about. The head of gold, he even says, you, King Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. Of course, kings and kingdoms are interchangeable in the book of Daniel, and so it was King Nebuchadnezzar was the brilliant head of the Babylonian Empire, but Babylon was this gold. And then the Medo-Persian, that's what took over, conquered the Babylonians, and it was, even though it was slightly larger land area-wise, but it didn't quite have the same cultural and long-term lasting influence that the Babylonian Empire did. So it was brilliant, but not quite on par as what Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom was. And then you had the Greek Empire. And this one gets a little confusing, but if you study Daniel, it explains it all. But it talks about the king of Greece coming. Well, there was only one ever unified king of all of Greece. That was Alexander the Great. But after him, of course, it talks about these prophecies about being divided in four, and we'll get into that in the history because the four generals, four of his top generals, basically divided the empire that Alexander done. Now, each of these four generals, even though they took different parts, what was their background? What kind of ethnicity were they, I guess? That's what it said. They're all Greek. So what did they bring to each of these, even though it was divided up all over that area in a large span? What did they bring? They brought Greece with them, in essence. They brought a Hellenistic way and a philosophy. And so all these countries were really influenced greatly by this Hellenistic thought. Certain things about education, study was very important. You have in Egypt, the largest empire largest library that ever was probably built in Alexandria. It's where the Rosetta Stone was found. And basically the reason we can know what these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs mean is because during this time period they built this Rosetta Stone that was the key to understanding the hieroglyphs, and had Greek on it, some other things, and so anyway, really quite amazing. And so you had all these; they brought this with them. So Rome then is this last kingdom of this prophecy, not the last, but the one that it was a fearful kingdom. But you know what Rome really liked? They conquered all this, but they had a great affinity and appreciation for the Hellenistic way, philosophy, and everything. So even though Rome takes over, Rome still embraces all those aspects. So this language is left. The influence, even Rome even adopts the mythical gods that the Greeks worshiped and things. Of course, we know that, the prophecy talks in Daniel 2:44 that the church, the eternal kingdom, would come during the time of this fourth kingdom, the Roman Empire. But anyway, in the time between the Testaments, Babylonian Empire was over. We read about that in Daniel. And then you have the Medo-Persian. And you read about the Persians, primarily they were by far the largest influence of that kingdom. You read about it in Daniel. You read about them in Esther. And then probably just a little bit later than that, you have Nehemiah and Ezra and Malachi as well. And they live their lives under this Persian empire, these Persian influences. by the way, some of the Eastern, Eastern influences that you will see even in the New Testament times came because of this time. Persia is technically more Eastern than it is Middle East. And as a result, they have different things they do, different philosophies, different ways they live. One of the things you'll see in the New Testament, who was it? They had did the classic painting of the Last Supper. Michelangelo? Yeah. And anyway, you have that, and how is it depicted? They're all sitting at a table, kind of like we think, except everybody's facing one direction. It's like they're getting a picture, it wouldn't have been that way no matter what. But anyway, that's not what it would have been. They would have eaten, at that time, they ate the way the Eastern custom was to eat. Does anyone know how they ate? Yes. Yes. What was their body position? They weren't sitting. Yes. They would be laying. And typically what they would do is the food would be such that generally you have some type of bread that you could get the food and eat. But anyway, they would lay and they would kind of be propped up, usually lay their left arm, they'd be laying on their side, left arm, and then they'd use their right arm free so they could eat. Doesn't seem very, I like both arms, I get more in that way. But anyway, that's the way they did. Maybe they, it was a good diet too, I don't know. And that's why when they talked about that John was at the bosom of Jesus during this meal, that's why, because they were sitting that way. So, once again, the reason that was the case is because of this Persian influences. Well, so that's at the end of Malachi, we're under still this Persian rule. Shortly thereafter, though, we have Alexander the Great comes about. And he, by the way, anyway, we'll see this, but, if you remember at the end of Nehemiah, basically, even though they were under the rule of Persia, the Jews were basically allowed to do their own thing. They had set their city. And when Alexander the Great came, and he was just burning down every city he came to, the only city he didn't burn down the walls and burn down the entire city was Jerusalem. And according to historical accounts, Jaddua, the high priest of the time, met Alexander the Great at the wall, and he had the scroll of Daniel. And he showed him where Daniel talked about the Grecian king, the king of Greece coming. And Alexander the Great looked at that and said, "That's me." And so he spared Jerusalem as a result of that. Anyway, then at some point, though, in the New Testament, though, we're not under Grecian rule, are we? We're under Roman rule. So, that is what we're going to be studying about historically, what takes place in this Grecian time and what takes place in the Roman time. And so it's kind of interesting. A lot of it's world history. I don't think kids actually deal with world history like this anymore. They go all the way forward to, there's pros and cons. I'm not going to say it's all bad, but they go way up to pretty early history and do world history now. Now, it allows them to go some things a little more in depth. But, when I took world history, we went all the way back because we looked at it from, America has been Western influences while we are what we are. And so we looked at that back in the day at world history. We went all the way back to some of these things, which is interesting because when I took world history, I'm like, oh, I read about that. So anyway, it's just fascinating. But so a lot of this does help if we know this. Okay, so we're done with the slides, but I wanted to go over a few other things. I will have some handouts next week, and just as a little bit quick review, the Babylonian period was from 626 to 539 BC. All these dates, by the way, are approximate, year or two either way. Judea was captured and Jerusalem destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, 605, 597, 586 BC. Remember those three times.
Many Judeans taken captive. Jerusalem, a temple was destroyed in 586 BC. The Persian period from 539 to 331. Cyrus the Great from 550 to 530. Capture of Babylon, 539. The Cyrus Cylinder in British Museum says Cyrus allowed captives to return to their homelands, build temples, etc. Isn't that interesting? This confirms what we read about in the Bible, does it not? 2 Chronicles 36, 22 through 23. Daniel was active during this period, Daniel 10. And of course, we've talked a little bit about a guy named Darius the Mede. He was likely a sub-king, not the same equivalent as the emperor. Following this, the ones we are not nationally mentioned is a guy named Cambyses, and then you have Darius the Great. These are Persians, and then you have a fellow named Xerxes. Now, most scholars believe that this Xerxes is the same as Ahasuerus. Where do we know about Ahasuerus from? Esther, yes, he was the king of Esther, Ahasuerus. Now, there are some that say Ahasuerus was actually Artaxerxes, but that's a small minority, and the evidence is really starting to lean more towards it was Xerxes. So, and then you have Artaxerxes, who is who we read about in Ezra and Nehemiah. And Persian dominion continued for another century until the rise of Philip the Macedon. I know who Philip the Macedon was. Oh, he wasn't technically a Greek, but he had a famous Greek son. Philip the Macedon was the father of Alexander. So that's where that comes from. And he prepped all the work that Alexander would then inherit to unite and unify Greece. One of the things that Artaxerxes is the one, actually it may be Xerxes. One of these is the one, if you think it is Xerxes, is the one if you've ever seen the movie The 300, which it is told as a fable the way the Grecians would tell it, so it's way embellished. But although it is a true historical account where these 300 men did hold off for a little while this massive army of the Persians. Ultimately, it didn't work, and the Persians kind of ravaged through Greece. But they present Xerxes as this like 7+ foot tall guy that's just like this, it's just incredulous the way he looked. And once again, that's not probably just like an old guy. But anyway, it is interesting that some of this stuff is history. So, I think it is fascinating when we understand that these events did occur. Now, the rise of the Greek empire and the spread of the Greek culture, Greece began to emerge as a nation several centuries before the time of Alexander the Great. But that part of history is not essential to study. And so we are going to try to limit this. There's other things obviously going on in the world. And in my world history class, we studied about the Mongols, and we studied about those type of things as well. But that's not pertinent to this time period of first century, as we're going to get into. The very mention of the word Greek brings to mind some of the glorious achievements of this remarkable race. They excelled in almost every area of human activity. Ancient Athens was the intellectual center of pre-Christian history. Here all the arts flourished and reached the heights of attainment. The Greeks developed the most effective language the world has known. By the way, if you do any kind of study in the Greek language, it is such a precise language. The words they use are very precise. A lot of English words, what you'll find is not necessarily precise. The word can mean this, it can mean that. Just the way you say it even can be different. Greek is very specific. Even things like gender, it's very specific on gender. It's very specific on which person it is, if it's plural or singular. It's very specific on all kinds of things. In philosophy, literature, sculpture, architecture, and other liberal arts, they made a contribution unequaled by any other people. They gave this world such men as, I'm not even going to try that first one, Aristophanes, Xenophon, Socrates. Maybe you heard of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Diogenes, Alexander, and on and on. In the 4th century before Christ, their culture was to be taken by zealous apostles far east into the Orient itself. And anyway, next week we'll deal with the Persian and Greece wars, how that impacted the 1st century, and then we'll look how it was divided. I'll have a map and everything. We'll see it, and we'll also get back to the book of Daniel. In Daniel, I believe it's 11. What you'll see is where it talks about the battles between the north and the south. Those battles are between the kings and the kingdom of basically the Seleucids and the kingdom of the Ptolemies. The Seleucids were based out of kind of more like Syria. The Ptolemies based out of Egypt. And where they met was right at what was known as Palestine, or what we call Israel. And so they fought over and over. Yes? The Koine Greek would have came about during this time period as well. Basically, yes, it would have came about. So after Greek conquered, basically it became the language of the world. And as a language of the world, because it was such vast and it was such a, from a monetary standpoint, it was the language of money, kind of like English is today. So everybody learned Greek. But most people didn't classically study Greek in like a school or anything. So what they learned was more of a common man's version, and that's the Koine Greek. So it came about during this Hellenistic time, and it was basically a common man's Greek. So that's the language that the people would have spoke and written, not necessarily the highbrow, very high intellectuals. This would have been the language of your fishermen, the language of your carpenters, the language of your, just your regular folk. And so it would have been during this time period. It's interesting to me, though, that when Rome took over, what was the language that Romans spoke? Okay, Latin was their native language, but they really, I can't express it enough, they really liked this Grecian, this Hellenistic way. So as a result, also Rome was big on, we want control over people, so we've got their trade, their money, and all this type of stuff, but, we're not going to make people do too much. As long as they will give us our tribute, we'll kind of let them kind of do their own thing. And so, what language did everybody else already speak? Greek? Just let them speak Greek. But they like Greek, and so it's like, okay, this works well. So that's the way it was. But the language of Rome at the time was Latin. Now, let's see, if you're into linguistics, what language did Latin evolve into? Latin's a dead language, by the way. It's not actually written or spoken in a sense of any people. But what language did it become? Yeah, it's Tang. It's Tang. So, now, see, language origin is really interesting because, like you said, the Romance languages, they all kind of came from Latin as well. But obviously, this influence. So, French is not exactly Italian, though. So, it's like a little different. And so, you do have that. But, yeah, Latin is basically really, 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 really old Italian. So, by the way, this is, especially if you're maybe looking at ACT type stuff, if you know a little bit about Latin, it'll probably help you with your English. Because a lot of our words have Latin origins. But who did I say that the Romans really liked? All those Latin words are actually from Greece. And so a lot of times when I'll pick a word out or use a word or find a word that I think is important in the New Testament, it actually has become an English word. For example, like I said, heresies. That's a Greek word. Hygiene, eugenis in the Greek means healthy. And so anyway, a lot of these words, because, so even though that was way back when, that time period has an influence even on us still to this day. So, I know sometimes people don't get into history like others, but it is true. It had an influence still on us today. How many Greco-Roman revival architecture buildings are still built or have been built in the United States? So it has an influence even today, but can you imagine the influence it had during the first century? And so that's why it's important to know these things, because when you read about little subtle things in the New Testament, you fully understand how this came about because of what took place in this time period. Now, the way Rome did that, though, like I said, they didn't want to make a big fuss. When Daniel talks about the feet of iron mingled with clay, it didn't create any allegiances. So when Rome began to fall, all these, these countries and provinces that they were over, Rome starts getting in battles. They're like, man, those kids, doesn't bother me any, that's not me. And so it didn't create people in Jerusalem, they didn't have this identity that were Romans. That was a very special thing. So it wasn't like they took over and they made everyone to become Romans. That's not what they did. And so, when we think of people conquering other countries, that's generally what they did. For example, even in, say, like when Japan invaded Korea and occupied Korea for about 40 years, and also Taiwan and even parts of China, their goal was to actually assimilate. They wanted to eradicate those people of who they were and what they were, and they wanted them to become Japanese. And that's the way most times it is. That's when you conquer people, that's what you want. Rome had a different philosophy, and it worked really well for them for a long period of time, but it's also why it came unraveled so quickly when it did. So, any other questions? That was a good question, Steve. Any other questions or anything in particular that you're wanting to see? Now, we're going to see some really big historical figures in this time period. You're going to see people like Alexander the Great. You're going to see people like, you ever heard of a lady named Cleopatra? Julius Caesar, and of course King Herod. We'll get into all these people because they are very important. One that is really important to the Jews is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And you'll see why. He's the one that just was awful. He's the guy that was in charge when the Maccabean revolt took place. And, Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, that's when that took place. So there's a lot of different things like this. Any other comments or questions? Well, let's, if I want a song to sing, we'll close out. We'll sing a song and have prayer. If I know it, I'll sing it. If I don't, Steve will come sing. Oh, I know that one. Okay. Mansion over the hilltop. Larry, can you turn up the audience mic on about 3 or so? Mansion over the hilltop. Now, we've not really developed this for a invitation tonight, but we always give the opportunity. And so basically, if you have any need, would like to study about being a Christian, need to become a Christian, or just have or need the prayers of the congregation or want to repent for whatever reason, something maybe you've done in public nature, this is the time to come. 881. I'm satisfied with just cause below a little silver and a little gold, but in that city where the ransom will shine, I want a gold one, that silver line. I've got a hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold. Don't think me poor or deserted or lonely. I'm not discouraged. I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city. I want a mansion, a robe and a crown. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold. Steve, would you lead us in closing prayer?
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you so much for the day that you've given us. We thank you for all that you provide for us each and every day. Father, we're thankful for this place that we have to come to worship, be together, learn more about your word, and worship you. And we hope that things that we have done here this evening have been pleasing and according to your will. Father, we're mindful of those who are unable to be here this evening. And we're mindful of those on our prayer list and on the prayer on their behalf. Father, we're so very thankful for your Son Jesus, for his willingness to come to this earth and die on the cross, so we may have a hope. That if we're obedient and faithful, have a home in heaven with you someday. Father, even though we're Christians, we realize that we have faults. We stumble. Father, we ask you for forgiveness for these reasons. As we leave here this evening, we go back to our homes. Help us to remain and be alive to those around us. Help us to make use of the opportunities given to us to share the gospel of the good news with others. And most important, Father, to be the example that you have us to be. Help us to live each and every day with you in mind, goal and be with you. Father, this is our